It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Melissa McHale. Dr. McHale, I'll give you her bio in a minute, but I just wanted to say from the very first time we met, I hope she'd be a co-conspirator and a friend. She has a remarkable energy. She works on almost too many things simultaneously to believe. And I know that she and I have, we've worked on a number of things now together, and I think for me it's been in a very complementary way. So we're really excited that some of the things we've been working on over the last 2 years are starting to come together with this urban theme in the conference, with our IGA with the city, where we hope we'll be able to engage Dr. McHale and a number of CSU faculty in that work, as well as at the Spur campus, the former National Western Center site where the Salazar Center will have its future home. So with that, Melissa is an associate professor in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Sustainability and a member of the Natural Resource Ecology Lab at CSU. She studies urban ecology and sustainability, and her research encompasses a diverse set of themes, including social drivers of urban ecosystem structure and function, linkages among landscape patterns and human health, and landscape preferences and biodiversity. Melissa is also an honorary research fellow at the Wit City Institute at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Wits, it might be Witwatersrand, anyway, she can tell us, and she sits on the Salazar Center's Campus Advisory Committee. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beth. You're not supposed to make me cry before I start a session. So I'm going to try to get myself together over here. And I aspire to be as an amazing moderator, Secretary Salazar. I don't know if I could live up to that, but I will do my best. I'm going to share my screen now and get us started because we have so much to share with you today, and we're very excited. We've been practicing. We're ready to go. Okay. So today we have a group of scientists from Colorado State University here to discuss with you. Can you hear me? Oh, that's somebody else again. Okay.
Everyone could please mute. That would be great.
Everyone else did so good at not getting distracted by that, but I definitely do. Okay. So we're here to discuss with you the state of the science on urban conservation and biodiversity. I am Melissa McHale, and I am an urban ecologist. This picture of Vancouver, British Columbia, was used to advertise today's symposium on social media. It is a beautiful picture of a beautiful city. However, it can also elicit a feeling of dichotomy, that there is the city and then there is nature, that there are humans and there is the natural world. As we begin our lightning series today, I would like to propose a somewhat different perspective. Okay, it's not letting me switch. The science of studying cities has changed with our goals for urban areas and our vision of their future. You can imagine that our vision of the city has changed drastically over time. In recent history, cities were industrial centers where people could live near their work. As those cities became polluted and unhealthy, we created a new vision, the sanitary city, where all bad things were to be removed from cities as quickly as possible. That has caused a good amount of environmental challenges for us as well. And so now, with most of the world's population living in cities, our new vision is the sustainable city. Personally, I like to say cities are the answer. For them to be the answer, though, will take some changes in perspective. First, we all have to agree that cities are ecosystems. That shouldn't be hard, really, since ecosystems can technically be anything we want them to be. But let's think about ecosystems simply as places where we can study and manage the interactions between the biotic, the living components of the system, and the abiotic, or non-living. We can think about these same interactions in the city. They're just sometimes more complex. Here, it is harder for some people to accept. I like to say cities are natural ecosystems. We talk about nature in the city and how it provides us with many benefits, but we're only halfway there with that interpretation of cities. Humans are like other ecosystem engineers, termites, beavers, redwoods. and we have created a disturbance of some kind and a complex ecosystem that responds to what we have built. We can even design these ecosystems to produce more benefits or more ecosystem services than they would have before our intervention. This year, Scientific American released an article about global biodiversity and how it's declining, and we are failing to meet our conservation goals and targets. True, the world seems to be experiencing a very dramatic extinction event. On the other hand, we have barely begun to make an effort to create cities that help preserve biodiversity. And like David Attenborough says in Planet Earth 2, we need to explore the value and opportunities provided by this newest habitat on Earth. With that, we will launch into our lightning round from CSU. Liba Pechar is an associate professor and conservation scientist in the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology. Her interdisciplinary research focuses on restoring biodiversity and ecosystem services in the places where people live and work. I should also mention here, Liba is this year's winner of the Salazar Center's CSU Conservation Impact Prize. Yay, Liba. Kelly Curl is an associate professor of landscape architecture at CSU. She studies the economic, environmental, and social implications of green infrastructure in land use and water planning. Jean Kelly is a professor of pedology and deputy director of the Colorado Agriculture Experiment Station. He studies the impacts of climate change and land use on soils and their evolution. I just call him the soils guy. Matt Ross uses large public data sets and sensors to better understand how people change landscapes and rivers. Jenny Cross is a professor of sociology and the director of the Institute for Research in the Social Sciences. Her research and teaching both focus on working with community partners to solve local community problems and improve community capacity and resilience. And then you will hear briefly from me again at the end of this lightning round, summarizing the state of the science. And finally, of course, we want to hear from all of you. And we'll open the discussion to questions from the audience. Very quickly, I just want to orientate the audience to where we are speaking to you from right now. Colorado State is in Fort Collins, Colorado. It is just west of the center of the US. The Front Range of Colorado typically refers to the cities and towns sitting on the eastern edge of the Rockies. Urbanization is occurring at a very fast rate from Fort Collins in the north, throughout Denver, and to Pueblo in the south. These cities are growing in a semi-arid grassland or a water-limited environment. Much of the research we talk about today, not all, will take place in one of these cities. This research is important to our overall understanding of cities, since right now, much of what we know about urban ecosystems is from the study of large temperate cities. And now we will move on to Liba.
Hello, my name is Liba Pechar, and I'd like to thank Melissa McHale and the Salazar Center for the opportunity to join you all today. I'm thrilled to be here. So I'm a professor, as Melissa mentioned, in the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology at Colorado State University. And I'm going to talk about urban biodiversity and the ways that we can sustain open space for nature and people. So I'm going to focus on Fort Collins, Colorado, which is currently my hometown. And Fort Collins, like many other mid-sized towns and cities across North America and beyond, is growing very rapidly. And we have an urban growth boundary that helps protect our important rural lands. But as sort of a side effect of having that urban growth boundary is that the city is getting denser. So it's growing in and it's growing up. And as a byproduct of that, there's concern over losing some of our urban green spaces or open spaces. And these are the ways that people experience nature every day. So whether that's biking to work or walking their dog or taking their kids to a playground or to schools. And so the city, together with a partnership that included myself and some other colleagues at Colorado State University and the Wildlife Conservation Society, launched a program called the Nature in the City Initiative. And the vision of this program is to create a connected open space network that's accessible to the entire community. And by that, we mean a 10-minute walk to nature, not as the crow flies, but a safe, easy walk, that also provides a variety of experiences for people and functional habitats for plants and wildlife. And that doesn't mean that every green space needs to provide maximized benefits to people and maximized benefits to wildlife, but the portfolio of green spaces across the city should achieve this vision. So as part of this partnership, my colleague Sarah Reed with the Wildlife Conservation Society and I launched a program focused on these two focal groups of species, birds and butterflies, to better understand how urban green space across the city of Fort Collins was providing habitat for biodiversity. So we set up a network of 166 sites distributed across the city along a gradient of residential use and across a bunch of different types of green space. So these included natural areas, which are public spaces that are actively managed for wildlife and human-sensitive species, but also certified natural areas, which are private lands. So these are owned by individual homeowners or groups of homeowners that have, there's a series of incentives by which that they manage that land for native species. It also includes schools, it includes urban ag, it includes ditches and trails and industrial open space and other types of land uses. I'm just going to show you a few results here. So along the x-axis are these different types of open space in the city of Fort Collins, and the y-axis is the species richness or number of bird species detected in these places. And so you'll see that we saw the highest number of different types of bird species in natural areas, but also as a close second in certified natural areas, which was really exciting to the city. This is a city program, you know, to help catalyze restoration activities on private land. You'll see at the other end of on the right side of the axis here are things like schools, residential open spaces, and urban ag, which provide less habitat for species richness for birds. And yet remember, these are equally or more valuable because they also provide access to people. On the lines that you see here now on this graph, the light green line is showing the proportion of birds detected in that type of open space that were urban sensitive. And this is important because it's important to think beyond just numbers of species, to think about the groups of birds that we might be actively interested in protecting or providing refuge for in a city. Urban adapted birds are more or less everywhere, but these urban sensitive species are finding their homes in these natural areas and certified natural areas. So one exciting piece of this project is after the first year where we used technicians to do these surveys, there was so much interest in the community in this project that we turned this project into a community science project, which has formally been referred to as citizen science. So we're actively engaging community members to also collect data on birds and butterflies. And as part of this project, which then occurred over the subsequent 4 years, we also asked community members before and after they participated in this project how it increased their scientific literacy or their understanding of the natural world. We saw some really interesting increases in their knowledge of birds and butterflies. And we also saw that it increased their intentions to engage in conservation action by having the opportunity to participate in these programs. So I want to wrap up by pointing out that we think that the value of this project is that it enables us to create maps that are shown here, for example, which show areas that are important for human-sensitive birds and butterflies, and also the areas between those spaces that might be important for connectivity and connection. And we hope that the city is actively using these data to help make decisions on where to develop and where to protect, while also centering equity in those decisions. And the value of collecting these data is that we can go back and resurvey these points in the future and actually assess the outcome of these land use decisions. So I'd like to thank our partners on this project, especially Sarah Reed, our graduate student Miko Jimenez, our partners at the city, the community scientists, landowners, and HOAs that participated, and the city of Fort Collins for being a funder and a really important partner in all of this work. And I'd like to thank you. And at this point, I'll welcome our next speaker, which is Dr. Kelly Curl.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? And you can see my screen? Excellent. Well, thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to speak here today and be part of this panel. As Melissa had mentioned, I am an associate professor in landscape architecture, and part of my research is really looking at human health in connection also with ecological health of the landscapes. I am going to present a project that I had worked on while working at Peter Walker, with Peter Walker at PWP Landscape Architecture. And we were looking at and designing the Cleveland Clinic campus. Our founding father of landscape architecture, Frederick Law Olmsted, envisioned urban parks as lungs of the city. New York City's Central Park was built in 1858 as an oasis for the sanctuary advantage of breathing. In the 19th century, urban parks and public health were heavily intertwined. Industrialization and rapid urbanization led to epidemics of disease during this time. The urban green spaces were where city inhabitants could breathe clean air. Olmsted's parks were lungs for the city, for ecosystem services, human health, environmental restoration, and comprehensive planning. As landscape architects, how we plan, design, and manage our landscape should be guided for human health. Healthy landscapes improve air quality, can promote healthy lifestyles. Landscapes can make people feel comfortable, safe, and restorative, uplifting and healing for both physical and mental health conditions. So for several years, I had worked on the Cleveland Clinic, and the clinic is ranked number 1 for the nation of cardiac care. The growth pattern of the facility has progressively grown gradually, encompassing the surrounding city blocks of small-scale residential neighborhoods. This design is representative of the open space and budget system, where a designer may look at each individual building, setting parameters and budgets for each building itself. This project is a very closed internal system that excludes the relationship and designs with neighboring buildings. Campus planning and design are integral tools to create a cohesive infrastructure system that incorporates all buildings and open spaces, linking each of the buildings together by an overall designed master plan. The purpose of a campus is to bring together diverse people and with their ideas in an environment that creates potential for intellectual and social exchange. While physical character and quality of a campus are defined by both its building and its open space, it is the open space which has the greatest potential for unifying and providing a healthy space for humans. It can promote a sense of community, increase social networks and culture. The built environment, like streets, walkways, green spaces, courtyards, plazas, and gardens, have the potential to unite the diverse elements of the campus in a coherent way. The initial site analysis showed a disconnected landscape of vast amounts of impervious parking lots. The pedestrian circulation on campus is mostly interior, with a skywalk network for easy movement between all buildings during all seasons. Mapping the various entrances of each building provides points needed for exterior connectivity. And the main goal is to create a pedestrian campus by creating the Euclid Avenue as the pedestrian core and eliminates vehicles. So the master plan that I had first worked on is the one above. And this design, unfortunately, wasn't approved by the city of Cleveland because they were already working and redesigning and constructing the Euclid corridor. However, we were able to work closely with that design team to adjust their drawings and still define the campus then through its streetscape that runs through the campus and relationships to the buildings and pedestrians there. We want people, oh my goodness. We want people to become conscious of the new intentionally designed and constructed landscape, the level of novelty and complexity intended to inspire. And the first project in construction was the 2-block-long alley and series of pools located just north of Hart Center. The alley of tulip trees framed the entry drive, creating a graceful and calming entry. Our goal is to always make places unique. Typically, the landscapes are viewed as empty spaces between buildings. As a designer, it is important to make the landscapes meaningful and memorable. When the trees were planted here in the LA, it transformed the space in scale and character. Inspired by French gardens, the long alley aligns calming, reflecting pools. The tall columnar trees frame the pool and throw their shadows and reflect in the water. This minimalist landscape design is intended to make the emptiness visible. It is meant to calm the urgency and anxiety of coming to the hospital. The central reflection pools contain a gridded pattern of 300 Wisconsin granite boulders. They are spaced and arranged in a way that the car slowly driving by can pick up on the shifting geometries of the layout. At the end of the entry alley, visitors enter through a wide circular drop-off area that provides an 80-foot diameter lighted fountain as the centerpiece. The fountain is a piece of water standing alone in space. The water is contained by 2-inch thick acrylic walls that are rounded on top, allowing a slow movement of water to run over the edge, making the walls invisible. And the transformation of the Cleveland Clinic is seen in this new entry. The design goal of the hospital was to create a peaceful and tranquil arrival space where visitors and patients are calmed with faith and hope that they and their loved ones will be healed. Thank you. And our next speaker is Dr. Jean Kelly. Let me try to stop sharing.
Am I on? You guys got my screen? Hello?
You did in the middle, and then it disappeared.
Yeah.
Put it back.
We saw your screen for a minute. Yeah, try to
I'm
bring it
sorry.
up again.
Oh, hold on.
And while he's doing that, everyone, so far, okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Gene Kelly. I'm a professor of pedology. I'm also the deputy director of the Colorado Agricultural Experiment Station. I'm basically responsible for the 9 agricultural research centers that we have around the state of Colorado. What's exciting at CSU, along with the development of the National Western Center, is we'll be opening up a 10th research center, which will be called the Metropolitan Agricultural Experiment Station. That'll be at the Spur campus, and that'll be supported by the Agricultural Experiment Station. So it's really exciting news, and it provides sort of a template for us moving ahead, looking at urban systems. Looking at urban soils, it's a rather unique way of studying soils, and it's generally been understudied in the disciplines, in the multiple disciplines of soil science, but there's an intense interest in connecting something called soil health with human health. And there are many aspects of soil health that feed into the agricultural system, plant and animal life, of course, human nutrition, and the multiple ecosystem services that soils provide to us. Particularly in the Front Range area, there's been an intense interest in looking at creating local food sheds. And in order to do that, we need relevant and up-to-date soils information. Of course, as Melissa pointed out earlier, in semi-arid areas of the West, many of the things that we look at relate to water and water quality. And so that becomes another issue in urban areas because we use municipal water for different things. We have air quality issues because we are in an arid environment. So dust becomes a very important component of our ecosystems. And of course, for the development of cities across the region, we need to have soils information for some of the conservation planning that we're interested in. I'll just provide a little bit of soils background. Soils are remarkable. They provide, they have a scientific value, they have an educational value, and they also have a societal value. So you'll see, hopefully at the end of this talk, the value of soils. But soils are generally impacted by multiple things like climate change, but primarily land use becomes sort of an overarching determinant of what the soil looks like. So on the left area, you'll see just a summary of the major land types across the North American continent. And what you'll notice is that urban areas make up a very small percentage of the land area, but of course they hold most of the population. And in terms of soil health and human health, individuals that live in urban areas probably have a more intimate relationship with soils, and they're in daily contact with soils. So it provides sort of the incentive for finding out more about soils across these urban systems. To the right, you'll see something called soil orders, and this is a map provided by the Natural Resource Conservation Service. This is what they call a soil survey for the entire continent. And so much of the information that we have about soils come out of these soil surveys, and of course at the Carnegie One and other research institutions that we have across the country. When you look at the difference between soils that are outside of urban areas versus soils within urban areas, there are stark differences. And generally, we don't have methodologies developed to study urban systems. So to the left here, this is my favorite soil in eastern Colorado. This is called the Ascalon soil. It's actually quite beautiful, and I like looking at it. And I might not switch the slide because it's making me feel very peaceful right now. To the right, you'll see a soil in Denver, and this is a soil that's an urban soil. And you'll notice that it sort of doesn't have the same order. Materials have been moved around. This creates challenges for us to look at soils and to try to develop the sort of information and data that needs to be collected to make sort of assessments of the environmental conditions and again, connect this to human health. But quite frankly, I've been working in Denver on the soil survey for the last 5 years. So the soil on the right, I'm actually becoming very accustomed to, and I actually like that soil as well. In other words, I haven't seen a soil I don't like. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, along with Colorado State University's Agricultural Experiment Station, initiated a soil survey of the city and county of Denver. Denver was one of the top 50 cities in the country that did not have a soil survey. So we initiated this soil survey. We use students, professional soil mappers from the USDA, and we go out and we dig soil pits all over the city. And you might have seen us out there at different times. We dig in almost every sort of landform and land type. These are the sorts of data that we are collecting and we have collected. For example, what you see on the left is something called organic carbon on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is the concentration of what we call bioavailable lead. We look at every sort of available nutrient that we have in the soils. We do a suite of other sorts of analysis, but lead becomes very important in urban systems. In fact, it's been studied extensively in urban systems before. But being able to establish relationships between carbon and things like lead are really important, because what they do is they allow us to assess something called the bioavailability of these metals. For example, we've done some work earlier in Denver about 15 to 20 years ago, where we found that dust generation in the city was very important, and it was a key mechanism of mobilizing lead in urban systems. To the right, what you'll see is something called a heat map. So along with generating a soil survey map for the city of Denver, we can look at our geographic information systems and the data we've collected, and we can actually move ahead and create maps that basically target areas that need to be further investigated. So this is just a map that shows the distribution of what we call bioavailable metals, or in this particular case, bioavailable lead in the soil system. So finally, what I want to do is I wanted to just tell you, not only are soils valuable in terms of the food production, environmental quality, water quality, the use of water, water conservation, soils actually have some artistic value. And so I just wanted to share at the very end of my talk that this is, if you've driven with me in a car in Colorado from Kansas to Utah, I might have gotten out a few times. And generally what I did is I collected soil samples for a local artist of the different colors and different generations of soils. Right in the middle of the screen is where we see our Denver soils. And again, I find that the soil is not only of scientific value, of educational value and societal value, but soils are actually quite beautiful. So I'll finish my presentation there and I will wait for questions later. Thank you. And I will be introducing our next speaker, Matt Ross from CSU as well. Okay, let me get off my screen.
All right. Thanks, Gene, and thanks, Melissa and the Salazar Center for giving me an opportunity to share some of my work. So I work in urban water quality, and I try to take science and make it actionable. And I don't know what I am, but I use a lot of open data, and I'm a hydrologist and a biogeochemist. And I like this picture because this is one of our research sites, and this is our pristine urban site. So this is upstream of all of Fort Collins. And if you'll notice, there's a giant truck in the middle of the stream moving rocks around to support the bridge. So even in sort of like the outskirts of Fort Collins, these rivers that run through major cities, well, medium-sized cities like Fort Collins, are pretty heavily impacted by people. And so we have this little camera there to monitor the hydrologic conditions, but here we captured the megafauna of a big cat bulldozer moving dirt around in our river. And so this is sort of just an example of the kinds of impacts we see in these urban settings. So I wanted to start by giving a little tour of Fort Collins. We'll just go ahead and, oh, that's not working, typical. But anyways, this is Fort Collins, and the river that runs through Fort Collins is the Cache-la-Poudre River, and that's a sort of really important river for agriculture, for urban water use. So 50% of the water supply for drinking water for Fort Collins comes directly from the Poudre. The other 50% comes from Horsetooth Reservoir. And of course, Fort Collins is situated in this really unique situation. I think my computer's struggling to both stream and show stuff. Unique situation where, see if we can get world imagery, whatever, where almost all the water comes from the watershed up high that gets a lot of snowmelt, and that runs through basically pristine forests. But of course, if you're watching the news lately, 100,000 acres of that pristine forest has now become fire. So it's burning right now. And so the city of Fort Collins faces a lot of water supply issues between agriculture, fires. We've had a fire this year that's 100,000 acres, and in 2012, one that's 50,000 acres, and agricultural return flows. So ag water is taken out of the river and then goes back to the river. And so what that causes sometimes is something like we see here. This is just documentation of a fish kill in 2018. And fish kills can be caused by a variety of reasons, but this one was really scary because it affected about 2 to 3 kilometers of the river in the middle of the city where people go to recreate and go fishing. And the problem here is no one knows why. All the evidence we have, we can't really tell if this was a dissolved oxygen issue where the river went anoxic, which happens sometimes in Western rivers, or if this was a fugitive spill of some kind of chemical that killed all these fish. And so this was the summer that I started as a professor at CSU, and basically right away through connections with Melissa, I started working with the city to try to build a network of sensors that will identify these, come in to better understand them and sort of warn the city if they have as this approach that distributed sensors that give you real-time information can help us identify things like a fugitive oil spill or fugitive produced water spill. And at each of these sites, we've installed these sensors that measure 8 different water quality parameters, and they measure them every 15 minutes, and they report that data every 2 hours. And what we're hoping this will be used for is a sort of live data portal for the city to go to manage their various projects in the city. And we cover this huge gradient. This site up here called Risk Canyon basically is all the fresh water from the mountains, all the way down to the Fossil Creek output, which is where we've accumulated all of the agricultural return water and all the water that goes through the city. So this is like wastewater treatment ponds, et cetera. And all the things in between. So basically, as you go from left to right, you have increasing impacts. The sites in red are sites that have not been installed just yet. And I should mention, the legend over here shows this is a partnership with the city completely, and actually a private partner as well, In Situ, who's a sensor manufacturer. So we've been working with In Situ in the city to install these sensors and measure water quality parameters. And it's a really nice project because all the science questions are driven entirely by the needs of the city. So I really like this project, and I'll just quickly show you some water quality responses that happened last October. So I'll pause this video just to explain it. So on the left here, we have depth of the river on the top graph. On the middle graph, we have salinity. So just sort of how much salt is in the water. And then in the bottom, we have dissolved oxygen. And just so you know, 100% dissolved oxygen or greater than 100% is a good sign. If you go greater than 100%, that means there's algae producing oxygen in the water. And then at night, you'll see it dips down because the algae are getting eaten. And so there's respiration. So we're just going to watch this video. And as we go along, we're starting at the Risk Canyon, up at the top of the canyon, and we're going to go down and we're going to pick up new sensors. So we're like following a parcel of water as it's impacted by the different parts of the city. So we'll just watch this video now and watch the sort of water quality change. And you can see these sensors are sort of all in line with their dissolved oxygen, and that's because they're following daily patterns of sunlight. So in their sun, the algae are producing oxygen in the water, and you can see a really big difference in the chemistry in the rivers and in the salinity as well. And so downstream of the city, we picked up a lot of agricultural return water, and it is relatively high downstream of the city because there's a lot of salt in that water. And then as soon as this event happens where the depth goes up, and you can see it kind of cascade through the river, all the salinity goes down, and basically the river water becomes identical. And what this is October 2019, is that the city had just built a whitewater park, and this was a really unique event where they let Horsetooth Reservoir water be released. And you'll see this really sharp signal where now all of a sudden, all these stations that used to have really different chemistry are kind of identical. And also the dissolved oxygen went away because that flood basically flushed out all the algae. So this is sort of the kind of work we're doing with the city, and it's just a really nice full partnership that I need to escape. And of course, as we have the Cameron Peak fire and other disturbances, this is why we have these sensors on the ground, to watch this stuff happen and more in the city and be in conversation with them as they absorb these impacts, to try to react to them and also proactively plan for situations like the Cameron Peak fire. So thanks a lot. And next will be Dr. Jenny Cross.
Everybody seen my video now? My Zoom screen just changed and got really weird. Great. So we've heard from the other speakers about the natural environment and built environment and the things that we're doing to try to really improve the natural ecosystem of cities. But one of the most invisible parts of the ecosystems of cities is the social infrastructure, the networks of relationships and ties between people. And so I'm going to talk to you about social network analysis and how it makes the invisible visible, and it helps us to guide action and think about how do we work together better in order to solve these complex sustainability problems. On this first slide here, you see a group of people that were organizing together to form a regional economic development effort. And you know, regional economic development efforts face the same challenges that natural resource management does, which is crossing the boundaries between political units or ecological spaces. So here we have two counties, Greeley in Weld County in the green and Larimer County where Fort Collins is in the red, and we were looking for people that were boundary spanners and engaged in community economic development activities. And one of the most central nodes in the middle of the diagram that connects other large central nodes is someone from Denver. And so that's just an example of the making the invisible visible. We didn't really have any idea that one of the key players that was helping to make this regional effort happen is actually someone who was located outside the region. There we go. This is similar data. It's from that same data set, but it's visualized in a different way. This group of people were really interested in forming a diverse board, really thinking about equity and the economic issues that are facing diverse groups of people and sectors across those two communities. So social network analysis has a variety of statistical tools that help us identify different types of players in the network. In this case, we were looking for players who didn't just have a lot of connections, which is kind of easy you could get from interviews, but we wanted people who had connections and connections across different sectors. And so social network analysis allowed us to identify those people, and they're the ones colored in these nodes here. And you'll see that there are some from Larimer County, which is the left side of the diagram, and some from Weld County over on the right. So this is another case where network analysis allowed us to make the invisible visible in order to really achieve our diversity and equity goals, which are bringing together a diverse set of players to solve local community problems. One of the things that network analysts think a lot about is actually what we call the structure of the network. And the structure is based on the kinds of ties that people have. You all have heard about the structure of networks. Actually, you've heard about the 6 degrees of separation, or some of you know the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You've heard that anybody on the planet can be reached through maybe 6 ties. And this is the result of networks like the hub and spoke network, where you might have only a few ties, but there are some central players that are all connected to each other. From a community development perspective, we know that these features, when groups and agencies working on different issues are in that scattered fragment type of state, it's really hard for them to engage in coordinated action and tackle the complex problems that we're facing now. So we need to move more towards these structures of multi-hubs and core peripheries. Social network analysis allows us to actually get a pulse check on our community collaborations and see how are we doing. These are diagrams from one community collaborative, a grant-funded initiative to work on comprehensive public health planning and violence prevention. And in year 1, really the only agency in town that was connected to everyone else was the school district. But there was a lot of distrust in the network, and we see this, that trust is much lower in sparser networks. After the first year of the grant, at the beginning of year 2, we saw a lot of gains in connectivity in the network and people bringing together diverse sectors. By the end of year 3, the network is unrecognizable from the first one, and it has transformed in a few really substantial ways. One, the strength of ties, which is indicated by the thickness of those lines, but also the entire structure of the network, which types of agencies and organizations and efforts are connected to each other. Network analysis allows us to visualize what's invisible and to do something more than to just say, I have this many partnerships, but to actually demonstrate what does our capacity look like because of the ways that we're collaborating with each other now, and what are the gaps and opportunities for us to build new connections, what agencies are still kind of disconnected from the larger network. We were using these same kinds of tools to look at the sustainability projects in the city of Fort Collins. And if you can't quite tell it from this one, this is one of those kind of middle stages of development, but there are some important features that we can see that are happening in the sustainability work in Fort Collins. One of them is this cluster here in the middle, where we see that programs that are focused on climate action and energy and resilience are all tightly clustered together. The colored nodes are projects, and then the kind of gray nodes in this diagram are people from different types of organizations. And I haven't shown you the coloring or the kind of organizational situation. That's one of the things that we can do in network analysis, is kind of choose what we want to highlight and visualize. And here we wanted to highlight the types of projects and their subject matter and which ones were tightly clustered. So we see climate action, energy, and resilience being interconnected. However, we also see another really interesting connection. All the projects that were focused on transportation also had a health component. And so we weren't actually able to type those projects as one or the other. They all got typed as the same thing because all transportation projects were focused on having some human health and well-being outcomes, which was another interesting feature of the projects related in this survey. Then finally, we see something else interesting, and this was kind of a surprise to all of us who looked at the data, is that the projects focused on natural resources and water are all in the periphery, and they're in these kind of isolated projects that are not very well connected to others. Now, if you heard the talk about Mexico City this morning and other places where we think about building green infrastructure, we really should expect these natural resources and water projects to be well connected to the others. But in the city of Fort Collins, we saw this disconnection. So this is a great communication point to talk about, are we really getting to the level of integration that we need on our sustainability projects to solve these complex problems. Sorry, that was my dinger telling me my time is up. So I'm going to finish here quickly. Social network analysis allows us to look at things really simplistically. This first map is just organizations and their sector. It allows us to look at them with more complexity, looking at projects and topics and agencies. And it also allows us to look at much deeper complexity, multiple levels of organizations. So this is the movement where social network analysis is merging with other scientists and fields where we're thinking about ecology and the urban infrastructure and thinking about what are the multiple layers and networks, and those include governance and watersheds and people and organizations. And our ability to manage and to meet our collective sustainability goals requires us to think at levels of complexity we haven't before, and network analysis allows us to do that, linking these different types of infrastructure together in cities and to see things that would be otherwise invisible. Should be back to Melissa now.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay.
I love you guys. You guys make my heart so warm, and we're going to clap for you in a minute. But let's just finish up to give, because there's some great questions coming in already. I'm super psyched. Okay. In summary, what these presentations show clearly is that CSU is at the forefront of the science on the future sustainable city, and that all of these disciplines and all of this progress is necessary to create ecosystems that support human health and well-being, as well as biodiversity. You guys have a problem turning slides on the first time. These scientists have worked with partner organizations, both public and private. In fact, successful urban conservation programs will be highly dependent on data-driven management and partnerships between scientists, managers, and policymakers. For instance, this is a land cover map of Fort Collins, Colorado, made and analyzed in partnership between CSU's Urban Ecology Lab, the City of Fort Collins, and the United States Forest Service. Up until now, there were all kinds of guesses on how much tree, grass, and impervious cover was in our city. Now we don't have to guess. We know every single tree and where it's located. High-resolution data such as these are the baseline for many different studies informing management and policy for the city. For example, we can take satellite data on the left, which shows summertime surface temperatures in the city, and combine them with that land cover map I just showed you to see what kinds of land covers influence temperature and the urban heat island effect. On this map on the right, we now can visualize where the hot spots are in the city, what land covers are, and where they're playing a role in summertime surface temperature, who is feeling the impacts of those increased temperatures, and where we need to develop those interventions. This analysis shows us that all tree canopy we have planted in what was originally a grassland ecosystem is indeed having a cooling effect. I would like to point out that most of what we know about the urban heat island effect has been produced while studying temperate cities. In semi-arid cities, we're seeing different trends, and that is where we are experiencing a lot of urbanization globally in areas that are water limited. We can also begin to understand where all that outdoor water consumption is going in the city and why. On average, households in Fort Collins can use up to 6,000 more gallons of water per month than they do in the winter. We can assume all that water is used outside. In a water-limited environment, one might think that that cooling by trees must come at a significant cost. Yet we found that households with tree canopy often use less water than those without. Do not underestimate the value of shade in a semi-arid system. Now we can develop management goals and policies that help the city and its resident use less water, using data specifically for this place. What do we need to do in cities now? Properly evaluate ecosystem services and try to create multifunctional landscapes that support people and biodiversity. We've seen a lot of examples of that in cities around the world today. It's inspiring. For instance, in Fort Collins, these pictures have shown detention basins. We have seen evidence that detention basins provide us protection from flooding. But we need these open spaces in our city to do more, especially as we urbanize and densify. Perhaps this detention basin on the right was designed to do a little bit more than that. In fact, we think it must, but we're not really sure what benefits being provided or what costs the community might be feeling. We are already designing landscapes, neighborhoods, and cities that increase benefits while reducing costs. Imagine what we could do if we had real vision. Teams like this one from CSU can work with cities and other partners to build the future sustainable city, which is generally why we created the Urban Sustainability Research Network. There are hundreds of scientists, practitioners, activists, and policymakers a part of this network. And our work on bringing together partnerships for data-driven policy and management of cities is just beginning. Today, you heard from 5 of our scientists. Hopefully in the next year, we can bring to you more presentations, panels, discussions, highlighting the work of what we do here at CSU along the Front Range and across North America. So as we open up for questions, and I stop sharing my screen, I will ask one question of our speakers today. As you do this kind of work for cities, briefly tell us about one challenge or opportunity you encountered. And I think the audience will be particularly interested in how you approach strategic partnerships in your science program. In fact, I'm getting text messages right now about a question right along those lines. So let's just order right now, answer in the order that we talked today. Liba, you can go first.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa. So yeah, I would say that one of the challenges, and it's also an opportunity of doing this work and closing what I would call like the science implementation or science action gap, is that it takes some time to develop trust and relationships and to really understand what organizations like city governments or other organizations, how the science can best inform decision making. So where the gaps are and where the opportunities are for scientists and from universities and other institutions to engage with cities. And so that takes some time, and I think that can be a bit of a challenge both on the city side and also on the science side. So on the city side, sometimes they're in a position where they need to make decisions relatively rapidly, so they need information soon. And then the scientists have to be comfortable with sharing information, even maybe without 100% or even close to that certainty about the science that they're sharing. So they need to be just transparent about that uncertainty, but yet willing to share the best possible available data to help cities make decisions on the timeframes that they need to make decisions. And on the scientist side, sometimes that time can be a challenge, the way that universities are set up in our kind of reward structures, especially for younger scientists, junior faculty. Developing those trust and relationships can take years. So, the city, for example, the Nature in the City initiative, it took about 4 years to go from the initial discussions of this innovative idea to it passing city council and getting underway. And that can be sometimes a challenge for, say, a graduate student or for a young professor who, the way that things are set up, needs to be productive, right off the ground, hit the ground running. So I don't think that those things can't be overcome, but they're just challenges to be aware of. And they also highlight the value of these establishing long-term, meaningful partnerships and engagement with those partners. So thank you.
Liba, that was a really awesome answer, and almost everything, it includes a lot of what we've all talked about together. So I'm also getting a lot of questions coming in for specific people on our panel. So maybe if one more person wants to talk about that, or if not, I'll just start moving to these questions. What do you think, crew? Move on. All right. The question coming in is to Dr. Kelly, discussing the roles of urban soils and water catchment to reduce stormwater runoff, provide cooling and heating surfaces, plant diversity, and other benefits. I think people are interested in your examples of restoring urban soil health.
Mm-hmm. Great. Sure. Well, part of the survey itself is to, in a sense, develop, the necessary data, or the data that provides the platform for looking at specifically how the diverse soils within, say, the Denver area hold on to water and how they take water on. And so, we've done an enormous amount of work on measuring those different attributes, and they're completely different than what you would find, say, quote unquote, outside of the city or in, say, a grassland area or an agricultural area. One of the things that we're utilizing is the opportunity to set up monitoring. And so we're very interested in a sense, setting up monitoring programs across the city in urban areas. And so we're working with another group up at the Argonne National Laboratory, where we're developing sensors that can be used in some of these urban areas that are, basically disposable, and they're really relatively inexpensive, so we can get a great spatial coverage. So no, that's a really important part of what we're doing. The soils provide a critical aspect for stormwater, and also particularly in the city of Denver, we've been working in City Park last 2 weeks. I'm supposed to be out there today, sampling the soils, and they use municipal water there, and so you develop problems with salinity and things like that. Some of the other challenges, whenever you're digging in the ground, you might find something, and that's always a problem. So we have to be certified in asbestos abatement and all that sort of thing. And anyway, but it's great working with the city and county of Denver, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Great partnerships. I reiterate what Leva said before. So anyway, I hope I answered part of that question anyway. Yeah.
That's great. One of the questions also coming in is for Jenny, and I see she's actually answering it on the chat. It's about how do you actually analyze the social networks? And I think that there's another question hidden in there. So Jenny, maybe specifically you just want to talk about IRIS and the role of IRIS at the university for engaging communities and scientists to work together.
Yeah. So social network analysis is a really powerful tool, but it's also really complex to learn. And we have built a new institute called the Institute for Research in the Social Sciences that is a community-focused, engaged research center. So we don't have a research agenda of our own. We're doing what all of the panelists here are doing, which is engaging with research that comes from and answers the questions of our community partners. So we're a social science research shop that can bring those social network tools to any project. Aside from the tools that we use to analyze the data, there are a different set of tools that are used to visualize them. So those are not always the same. The most important thing is that when you're collecting original social network data, like the ones about the urban, sustainability network or the network for community development that I showed, those are custom tools that we created in order to answer a specific question. And there's a whole variety, again, of different tools to use for that. So our center is a good resource for helping people find just the right tool so that you end up with good data. The risk is that if you try to use something like Qualtrics, you're going to end up with a mess that doesn't allow you to really visualize and analyze the data that you want, and you'll spend a lot of time cleaning and not end up with a really good product.
Thank you, Jenny. So I think we're running out of time. Dominique, am I allowed to ask one more question, or do you want us to wrap up?
We've got just under 10 more minutes or so. We can go about 11.
Oh, we still have 10 more minutes? Yes, I was rushing us. I swear it was 11:40. Okay, Melissa, read the schedule. Great, let's keep these questions coming then. So one of the questions coming through has to do with whether all this monitoring we're doing, because there were a lot of talks and data on Fort Collins today, if we're piggybacking our data collection and thinking about additional data. Now, of course, I have some answers to this, but I'm supposed to be a moderator and let you talk. So does anyone want to pick that up and talk about maybe the ways in which we're networking? Maybe Liba, you could talk about how your nature in the city work, we're now thinking about setting up cameras through the city on top of that. Or Matt can talk about some of his work with streams and how we might be thinking about setting up urban research mountain campus in the city of Fort Collins.
Sure, I could say a few words and then I'll pass it on to Matt. So yeah, I think I don't know if that was the same question that I saw too, about making sure that data is publicly available too, and certainly all of our data is shared with the city. And I guess I don't know for sure that it's available more broadly to the public. I hope it is, but that's something that I will talk with them about. But one way that I know that our data is being used right now is like this has been underway for a few years, but Nature in the City has now shifted to a strong focus on neighborhood projects. So on projects that engage small groups of people in restoring natural habitat in their own micro communities within the city. And they're using our data together with their understanding of where there are gaps in terms of access to nature for communities across the city to prioritize where to provide funding for these community groups that want to do these local restoration projects. So that's one way that our data and other data sets are being leveraged to make decisions on where to invest moving forward.
I need to unmute myself. Thanks, Liba. Yeah, so I am like obsessed with this topic. It's sort of like what I think is my mission as a professor. And it's basically like data is not enough, right? So collecting data and a variety of actors collecting data, and the Cache-la-Poudre River has seriously like 37 different people collecting data in it. And the problem is not that there's not enough data, it's that there's not enough information and knowledge. And so I see our role as like taking all that data and turning it into knowledge, because it's actually pretty hard to look at like a dissolved oxygen profile and understand what it might mean for a future fish kill, or like how we should be managing the water that we pull from either Horsetooth or Poudre, the Poudre River, for water supply. So I think a big part of my work is thinking like from a user experience, user design perspective, how do we turn all that data into meaning and actionable items? And so the sort of like decision points and a decision support system. And so we're working sort of towards that long-term goal of turning all this data into meaning, aggregating it from all the different actors. Because, you know, I talked about the city of Fort Collins, but of course the city of Greeley uses the same water. There's a bunch of, Soldier Canyon uses the same water. There's a bunch of different actors that use this same water. More than 300,000 people rely on this river. And we want to get that data back in their hands. And I've been amazed at how willing the city is to share that data, not just with each other, but live. So like the end goal is to have all this stuff be live so the community can see it. And we have all of our sensors have little tags and people can talk to us. We have cameras. We're trying to like just build connection and intuition about what's going on in the environment in the city. And I think that means giving people both the data and some high-graded information knowledge service. So yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's vital that we figure out how to do that, not just here but everywhere.
I'd like to just add on to that this is one of the things that as a sociologist and social scientist I talk about all the time. People have this tendency to think, oh, if people have information, they can take new action. But what we really need is that data that is packaged in ways that simplifies and makes it obvious what action to take and answers questions. And so that is a really complex process there in the middle, like I was saying about social network analysis. And so where do we need science to move? Where do we need universities to move? Where do we need collaboration to move? And this is really an issue for funders. We really need funders that are interested and willing to invest in the long-term support of this information infrastructure that is these public warehouses of available data that we can control access to appropriately, and that people with specialized knowledge and expertise can get in and create an interface that takes all of that data that's out there and turns it into an actionable set of information and a visualization that makes that complexity, you know, intuitive and simple to understand. And so this is a world of science that I certainly couldn't have imagined when I was young, and that our universities and funders, I think we're all kind of scrambling to keep up with. But there is a real need for long-term financial support that isn't just like discovery of new things, it's actually maintenance of this community-oriented scientific infrastructure.
Yes, thank you for jumping in, Jenny. That's perfect. Jumping on that just also, the city of Fort Collins, like Matt says, has done amazing work with getting data to people. And they're taking complex data sets and making data dashboards so that people and students can even play with the data and see what the impacts are of change. So I've been proud of what they do for communicating that information. And all of our work, it's hard, right? This is the ethics of using science and investing in partnerships, right? Like there are some data that right now that we have that the city aren't ready to share. Because we haven't really been able to develop a way yet to actually release that to the public. We can't just release information on what every person in the city of Fort Collins, like how much water they're using. That's not fair. We have to protect people in the way that we collect and share data. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit more time. Like there's a delay. between some of the maps that I've shown you and the publication process, and when we can actually get it out there in an effective way so people can use that information to make their lives better. I think that the university plays a major role in this, though, in terms of students, and the cities are starting to see that students can really make story maps that go right on the website in all of their classwork. And so these partnerships and this long-term investment, I think, is also like a central part of that, is what our students can do and how we're training them in this realm to be leaders and then work with cities after they leave CSU. And Jean, I was just wondering if you wanted to follow up a little bit. You've been very much involved in the National Western Center. And so maybe you want to follow up on why the National Western Center is also, like, part of it is to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, there are multiple aspects of the National Western Center, and particularly the university's involvement there. Shifting emphasis to non-traditional partners, people living in these urban systems and working with these different agencies and such. But a big part of that is making the connection between the urban and the rural communities as well, because we have these sort of sectors that we need to sort of think about. We have the opportunities for an innovation center where people can come in, particularly related to food and human health. And the other thing that you're all talking about is this idea of having a data platform, or a place where, we're in the era of big data and monitoring the environment. And so the opportunity for the university is to sort of really make key investments in those areas. And there are plans for some sort of a hub down at the on the Spur campus. But yeah, I mean, it's a remarkable opportunity to have that location right off of I-70 there. And I think, everybody's really excited about it. And there are just an enormous amount of opportunities for us to sort of all work together in concert with the local communities and also with the government agencies as well.
So that was great. Thank you all. I'm going to take the lead of Secretary Salazar and say, can everyone please give our scientists a round of applause? They do amazing work. I am so proud of them and CSU.